Good day, everybody. Yes, it's another Wednesday. It's Startup and Innovators on the Atlanta Discuss channel. We always bring startup innovators. Sometimes they're just startup, that sometimes they're just innovators. But this gentleman has been here before. He's not a startup, he's a teacher, he's a mentor's mentor, and it's fair to call him an innovator because he has his own niche, which is on parenting, raising kids and all that. But so that clearly makes him an innovator on a very, very different pedestal. That's why today my guest is Mr. Taiwo Akinlami. Taiwo, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and you?
Oh
Good to
well,
see
I'm hanging in there. I want to be like you when I grow up. Yeah, I mean, for those of you, I'm sure it's not new to a lot of people if you're the reading type, and Taiwo is really out there. He's a fantastic guy. He's a lawyer, a parenting educator. If you need anything on parenting, it's your go-to man. One of Africa's leading voices on child safeguarding and family strengthening. So that tells you that he's highly cerebral, practical, and he's hands-on, just to put it in that way. We're going to be talking about his book. He wrote a book titled The Burden and Wisdom of Parenting. And I'm sure that's something a lot of us are interested in. So Taiwo, before we go into the nitty-gritty, what inspired that book? Why did you write that topic? I know you have a lot of flair for parenting, but why did you have to write that? Because I know you take a lot of classes and all that, but why do you want to put it in writing? Why inspired it?
well, that book is my autobiography. You know,
Oh,
I
okay, fantastic.
I I first wrote it
Mm.
when I turned 40.
Oh, wow. Mm.
And I did not publish it. I released it as an audiobook.
Mm.
So when I turned 55 last
Wow,
year,
wow.
I felt the need to I felt the need to revisit the book because a lot has become clearer, a lot have changed.
Mm.
And so the book is a compilation of my story, what I went through.
Mm.
Then from there, I moved to what are the principles
Mm.
that I have learned.
Mm.
And the third leg is what are the stones, instructions for people.
Mm.
And the fourth leg is every chapter ends with a manifesto. And this manifesto is how do you begin to use the content that you have read
Mm.
to build your own family,
Family. Mm.
your organizations, child-focused organizations, even your own personal life if you're not married or you do not have children yet. Because I don't want to create a book that just tells people movie-like stories, stories that sound too good to be real, you know. Um, so basically that is the whole idea,
Okay.
that battered the book.
Interesting. I like that you try to create a scenario that is not always perfect so that people don't think that life is a bed of roses when the disappointment comes. Okay, so let's start with on the book's title and personal roots. Your book with a deeply personal chapter, a tribute to your late father, titled "The Burden of Proof" and parenting. You spoke openly about childhood marked by neglect and abuse. Yet you frame your father's story with such compassion. How did you arrive at a place where you could both the burden of your father carried and the wisdom is still passed on without one erasing the other? You understand? You spoke of the negative, you spoke of the positive, yet you still met halfway.
Well, you see, everybody is a product of influence. My
Mm.
father was a product of the influence that raised him.
Mm.
Unfortunately, he might not even be aware of the impact of that influence on him. So he did the best he could do. I mean, as I wrote in the book,
Mm.
it was the best father I could have had.
Mm.
I could have, because how do I know? I came through him. I didn't make that choice.
Mm.
God made that choice. And so, having come through him, God knew him,
Mm.
his issues, his challenges, and he chose that I came through him.
Mm.
Now, so because of that, I bear no grudge against him.
Mm.
I know that if he knew better, he would do better. He would have done better.
Better.
So he did what he could, and the best he could do was to provide the kind of parenting he provided. So unfortunately, the kind of parenting he provided did not raise me, but he raised me. right? And so, but I'm not going to take that on him.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest tragedy will be that I'll become an adult, I'll be nursing the wounds of my childhood and be blaming my father, my mother
Mm-hmm.
for who I did not become or the failures, that may become my identity. But I chose to move away from that because you see, once you begin to blame your past, you create a very, very big barrier for your future and your present. So you cannot afford to blame your past. You can take a look at your past for the purpose of knowing where you came from and begin to ask the question, the things that you need to do for the purpose of your own advancement. So that is it for me.
Fantastic. So let's talk on turning personal pain into national movement now. Yeah. You said your advocacy work from Gilgal Partners in 1999 to Save for Children and Power Parenting today began as what you call your personal social responsibility project. Now, nearly 3 decades later, you have reached an estimated 10 million caregivers and children across Nigeria. What was the specific turning point where your personal story stopped being something were healing from you rather, yeah, and became the engine of a natural child safeguarding movement? What was the turning point?
Okay, so I became a person of faith in 1997.
Okay.
And when I became a person of faith in 1997, I began to find help. And as I began to find help, this help that I was finding was so real to me.
Mm.
My mind was being sterilized. My values were being, changed.
Mm.
I was witnessing a form of transformation. Now, it did not happen suddenly. It happened as I began to submit myself to a new value reorientation, basically beginning from studying the Bible. And as I began to do that, I began to see a picture different from the one that my parents revealed to me. The picture that my parents revealed to me was that of a worthless human being. Because when my father wanted to cane me when I was growing up, he would tie my hands, he would tie my legs, he would strip me naked. He would give me 3 strokes of the cane, I would go and sit down, and that could go on for half a day. And we lived in face me, I face you apartment where everybody minded their business except gossip. And so I was raised to think that I was worthless. And what were the things that were tied when I was growing up? Goats, chicken. And so if goats were worthless and they were slaughtered during Christmas or during Easter or during other traditional festivals, and I was also tied, it could mean that myself and the goats and the chicken we bear the same value, right? And so growing up, now, becoming a person of faith began to show me that there was more to me than my parents revealed. There was more to me than my parents suppressed. And as I began to see that, I began to understand that, look, my experiences were not unique. There are so many other people who went through the kind of experience I went through. And there are so many parents, like my parents, who are still in existence, or parents who carry the wounds of their childhood, who were raised by my own kind of parents, who are still around today. And I began to say that it was necessary, having received help, to go out and distribute that help, become a merchant of the help that I've received. So I was the number one guinea pig in my own laboratory of change. As I was receiving help, I began to dole it out. Now, please note, I didn't get to a point of perfection, saying I've arrived. As I began to receive help, I saw a level of difference, a level of change, a level of transformation. That was enough for me to work with, something for me to work with. I wasn't waiting for the time that it would be hunky-dory. Everything is okay. I'm fine. I wasn't waiting for that time. Now, if you ask me today, I am not where I used to be, but I'm not where I want to be yet. For me, it's a continuous journey. I keep working on myself every day. And for me, my story revealed to me that change is an ever-present possibility for any human being who is ready to take responsibility. So the idea is that if you have found help, it is important that you democratize the help that you have found. You build culture, system, policy, processes around it, and you begin to disseminate. That is the beginning of my own transformation. And that is why today my trainings are very personal. because they emanated from my story.
mm,
Everything I'm doing is a product of the experience that I've had. One of the reasons why I'm sure that the principles that we teach work
mm,
and will help others is because it has helped me.
mm,
Because I know the kind of life I used to live.
mm,
I know the kind of behavior, values, and the things that I experienced or inherited from my father, from my mother, right? But I know the difference between the life I'm living today and the life I was built to live.
mm,
I have completely deviated from that life I was built to live.
mm,
I tell people, if I were in prison today, life would have been fair.
mm,
If I were in psychiatrist home collecting tablet, life would have been fair.
mm,
If I were dead 6 feet below, life would have been
yeah,
fair. But you see that I'm living today is a great testament to the fact that change is an ever-present possibility
mm,
for anyone who is ready to take responsibility. Now, note the key word is responsibility.
mm,
I
mm,
was talking to a group of people yesterday. I teach a class every Saturday.
okay,
It's called the Legacy Now Leadership Project. I'm working with champions who we are launching into society to do the kind of things we have been able to do. We are working with the fifth cohort right now.
oh, wow,
And I was telling them yesterday that I say, look, why did God give you free will if not for the purpose of you being able to take responsibility,
mm,
being able to consent or withdraw consent at every point in time? Somebody said you may fall many times. You are not yet a failure until you say somebody pushed you.
mm,
And so for me, that is my disposition. That is the whole idea. I found help. Why will I keep this help to myself? It was like the story of the three lepers in the Bible who were fed. And they said, we can't keep this thing to ourselves. Let's go and tell the people in the city who were facing a serious case of famine that there's an abundance here. And that is my story.
fantastic. Yeah, you're just the state-of-the-art example of not living in denial. I really respect that. So on child-centered parenting as a cultural challenge, let's talk about that. A central pillar of your work is establishing that you call the right-based approach, what you call the right-based approach, child-centered parenting. Now, as that's your standard. In many Nigerian and African homes, discipline and authority are deeply tied to culture and even faith. Now, how do you make the case for child-centered parenting to a parent who genuinely believes strict, authority-driven parenting, is an expression of love without alienating them or dismissing their cultural context? I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to
Yes, I get it. You
say.
see, you don't shape a man's
Mm,
you don't shave a man's head behind him.
absolutely. Mhm.
If there are no children, there won't be parenting.
Mm,
We only begin to talk about parenting because there are children to be raised.
mm,
There are children to be parented. And please note,
mhm,
these children don't have to be your biological children, right? Because there are many ways to become parents. You can be a teacher, you are a parent. A parent is somebody who has influence on children.
mm,
You can be a foster parent. You can be providing kinship care.
mm,
You can be a neighbor who is looking after a child for a period. Your whatever relationship you have with the child that is able to influence the child
mhm,
is a form of parenting relationship.
mm,
So if there are no children, there will be no parents, right? So the central figure in this whole conversation is children. And that's why Mandela said children are the pivotal link between the present and the future.
mhm,
We focus on the children, because, and if you want to, so Maya Montessori says, if you want to instruct life, you must study life.
mm,
You cannot instruct an entity that you do not understand. You don't just get into a car and say you want to drive. You need to understand the car, how to drive, the mechanism of the car, the entire mechanical methodology, the processes,
mm,
right? If you are driving Toyota, it's different from driving a Mercedes or a Tesla, and all of those cars. They are different because the philosophy of those who create those products have a great impact on the products. So the same way, God is the creator of all human beings, and He created children. And you see, until we understand the entity, we do not have the moral authority to
mm,
raise them. And that's why I keep telling people, I said, look, if you want to raise children, you must make it a point of duty to graduate from the school of childhood. And until you graduate from that school of childhood, you do not have the moral authority or the legal authority. If you assume that legal authority, you will have been a usurper. So for me, this is how it works. So if we talk about children, there are two fundamental classes of knowledge, categories of knowledge that we must have about children. The first one is what I call the objective quantity. Now, objective quantity is what is available to be known about every child.
Every child, okay.
It's objective. It's everywhere, it's available.
Common knowledge.
Yes, common knowledge. God bless you. Now, we now have what we call the subjective quality. It means I'm using my subjective quantity to interpret my child, so that I'm studying my child, and now I haven't used the subjective quantity. I've been using the objective quantity. I'm able to use it to interpret who my child is. That leads me to what I call the subjective quality, because there are no two children that are the same. There are no two children that are raised in the same home. Because people say they are brothers and sisters raised in the same home. I said no. Because you see, I am not the same person I was when I was 30 years old.
Absolutely.
If I had a child at 30, I would have started raising the child. If I had another one at 35, I'm now a different person than I was at 30 when I gave birth.
The environment is different.
The environment is different. The personality is changing. My knowledge base is changing. So that means that I'm not the same person raising my child at 30, at 35, at 40. Now, having my first child at the age of 51, my child is 5 years old now. I'm not the same kind of person that I was when I was 45. So the kind of parenting I'm going to be providing today is going to be completely different from the one I would have provided if I had him at 36, at 40, at 50. Different. And so the thing is, we need to recognize that everything rises and falls on the child. The challenge a lot of times is that we assume we understand children. We believe we know who they are. Unfortunately, what is the commitment to research and development in Africa as to understanding children? When last did any university or any institution in Nigeria invest in a project for the purpose of understanding children from the economic, from the social point of view, economic point of view, political point of view, environmental point of view? Because you see, we carry a lot of studies from America, Yale University, Harvard, and all of these universities. They do studies. We forget that when you study an American child, the socialization of an American child is different from the socialization of African child.
So the application might not really work.
The application might not really work. Okay. But you see, what is the commitment of Africans to study the African child and understand who he is, his strengths, his limitations, his challenges, and all of that. So for me, that is why we feel the knowledge about the child is almost non-existent. That is why we have committed ourselves to helping Africans to understand who children are. And that is why we say our parenting commitment is child-focused. Our child-focused commitment is right-based approach. What are the rights of children? What are the responsibilities of children? Until we understand that, we are not able to provide help. Until you understand an entity, you are not able to help the entity. That is it. So if you say you want to parent a child, now I'm using a laptop to broadcast with you now. If I do not know that this laptop needs to be charged, I won't charge it. If this laptop powers down and I think that what I need to do is to put oil on it, I'll go and put oil on it. What am I going to do? What if I sincerely believe it's oil I'm supposed to put on it? Now, my sincerity, is it going to stop the damage that oil is going to do to the laptop? No, the laptop is going to be damaged forever. Though in all sincerity, I thought I was going to power it on. I don't want this interview to fail. I want to quickly come back online because the battery has powered down. But unfortunately, I'm applying the wrong the wrong solution to powering up the laptop, what will happen? The laptop will crash finally. If I'm able to find any document in it, I will be lucky. And so that's how it works. Our genuineness, sincerity, we really want to help our children. It's not enough. We need knowledge. Knowledge is what to do. We need skill. Skill is how to do it. We need attitude. Attitude is the fortitude to do that which you know we should do. And you see, when we are talking about all of these things, we need to recognize that there are 4 levels of ignorance we are dealing with. 4. The first one is we don't know everything. And that is understandable. God is the one who knows everything. Number 2 is that there are things we should know that we do not know. That is a big problem. There are things you should know in your state as a parent, in your state as a coach, as an educator, but you do not know. And that is a problem. It's like a professor of mathematics that does not know 2 plus 2. That's a problem. And he keeps parading himself as the professor of mathematics. And at the end of the day, we just show up and say, excuse me, sir, what is 2 plus 2? You say it's 16. And we're wondering where you get your professorship from. The 3rd level of ignorance is that there are things you should know that you do not know you should know. That is a bigger problem. You see, there are things you know that you do not know. If somebody comes to you to say, there are things you should know you do not know, it means you are going to receive it and you are going to want to do something. But when you're in that 3rd level of, there are things you should know, you do not know, you don't think that you know, you do not, no, there are things you should know, you do not know, and you do not know you should know.
No, yeah.
It means you are not even looking for knowledge. Now, the worst, which is where many Africans are, I'm sorry to say, there are things you should know that you do not know you should know, you now conclude that you know. So you are dealing with the subject matter with finality. There's no room for amendment. In the 3rd level of ignorance, there's still room for amendment if you find a level of superior knowledge. But when you have come to a prejudiced state, things you should know, you do not know it, you do not know you should know, but you now conclude that you know it. You have written books on that. You are leading broadcast on that. You are, teaching people on that. Meanwhile, these things that you are teaching is a fallacy. And I can give you a quick example. For example, we talk to children when we are talking about sexuality education to say that there's something called private part, public part. So I ask the question, private part, public part is not a subject matter in sexuality education. Because private part, public part is not a biological conversation. It's not a subject matter in biology. Biology defines something as part of the body. In biology, there's nothing like private part or public part. Biology mentions every part. In biology, there's no one part of the body that is superior to the other. Every part is defined according to purpose. Then you now want to talk about sexuality education, which is a biological issue. It's a biological subject matter, and physiological subject matter, and psychological subject matter, and spiritual subject matter, political subject matter. All of those things, are built around sexuality. And so you are now coming to tell me that there's something called private part, public part. Private part, public part conversation is around decency. The parts of our body that should be exposed, the parts of our body that should not be exposed, right? Decency dictates that. It has nothing to do with sexuality education. But you see, people have written books telling us about good touch, bad touch. People have done TV broadcasts, television broadcasts, documentary on good touch, bad touch. Meanwhile, no touch is good if it is not for the purpose of providing care or cautious affection to a child. Right? Every touch that is unnecessary is bad. So you don't talk to children about private part, public part. You talk to them about private space. You talk about their private space. You talk about the fact that nobody has the right to touch any part of their body except for the purpose of providing care and cautious affection. Now, even if you are a father, can you go and bath for your 8-year-old daughter and say, I'm trying to provide care? What kind of care is that? Except the child is ill. An 8-year-old should be able to bath for herself, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old. How can a father be in the bathroom with the 5-year-old, with the 50-year-old daughter and say, well, I'm trying to help her when she's not ill? So whatever care you claim to be providing at that level, if we begin to suspect incest, we won't be wrong. Nothing may be going on, but that idea of unusual, inappropriate relationship with a daughter, with a son, can make us to begin to suspect that something is going on. You cannot get away with it by saying it's my daughter. Yes, it's your daughter, but the level of care that my 4-year-old needs is then from the level of care that 15-year-old will need, 16-year-old, 17-year-old will need. And so these are fundamental issues that, people who believe they know and they conclude that they know and they continue to teach these things. I, have a program, every part of my body is private to me, intensive. The purpose of that program is six weeks. That is 6 days in class, where I am committed to demystifying sex. To demystify sex and sexuality education, I first need to deal with the person who wants to teach it. Because a lot of times we carry our pain and the misinformation that the society has fed us with over the years, and we bring it to a table and we form a curriculum around it and begin to mislead more people, and that creates more problems.
Interesting. I like the way you broke the ignorance part into like 4 areas. Anybody that's read philosophy, you know that the philosophers too addressed it one way. When they said obstacle to critical thinking, they said like communication and language, which is one, indolency, which is mental laziness, and I think pragmatism was also one of them. There's another one I can't remember. So I agree with you. You're really on point with that. So now on institution and the system behind most of your messages, especially in your book, you often say that safeguarding a child requires more than good intentions. Now, it requires a system codified into policy, broken into process, built into culture with your culture edge, legal and child safeguarding clinic, which you now have, working with school, churches, and government ministries, especially in Nigeria. What is the single most common gap you find between an institution's stated child protection policy and what's actually happening on ground?
I think the major gap that I found is the bondage of culture. Culture is very powerful. And when I talk about culture here, I'm not talking about dressing. I'm not talking about hairdo. I'm talking about the dominant value system of a people, what you believe deep down. Because you see, this culture have been passed from generation to generation. Let me shake the table a bit.
Okay.
My son does not prostrate to greet me in the morning. When he wakes up in the morning, he comes to me and gives me a hug. Good morning, Daddy. What I want to teach him is the courtesy of greeting, right? And he doesn't have to be the first one to greet, really, right? I could be the one to greet him, so I don't want him to understand that you are the only one that should greet, right? Everybody should maintain courtesy within the home and everywhere you go. So if he wakes up and if he greets me 5 times a week, and one day he forgets to greet me, I don't chastise him because of that. I greet him and give him a hug. Okay. Now, so a few days ago, I was asking but my son does not prostrate to greet us, right? But when we go out and we meet Nigerian people, African people, we tell my son, prostrate. Then I was asking my wife to say, Love, please, I'm trying to, because each time that happens, I'm dealing with, are we not teaching this child double standard?
Or confusing the boy.
If prostrating is the way to greet elders, why does he not wake up in the morning to prostrate to greet us? Why are we not demanding that? Are we trying to show the people outside that we're raising a respectable or a courteous son who will prostrate to greet them because that's what they understand as the standard of respect from the culture they came from? Now, so the way things start with me is that I begin to query it. And so I'm still querying that. I'm still dealing with that. I've not come to a conclusion on it as to whether we are going to continue to insist that our son should be prostrating when he goes outside, when we are not insisting that he should prostrate for us. If we believe that prostrating is the way to greet, then we are going to teach him to prostrate in the morning. Then the question to me is that why do I need to genuflect Why do I need to prostrate to show that I'm cautious and all of that? Why do I have to kneel down to show that I'm cautious and all of that? Now I can curtsy, I can bend. Why do I have to be all fours, and all of that? I'm thinking about all of those things. Now that example is to show you how much I question culture. One of the things that people tell me, in our work is that they tell me, this is us now. Shebi, despite all that we went through, sorry, let me, my battery is about to go down. Just a minute, please.
No problem.
So, you see, when we talk about the point I was making was, there's something I always hear from people. They will say all these things that you are saying, we turned out well. People, is this not us? Despite all these things you are saying, we turned out well. The question I always ask is, let's define the word well. I said there's a difference between who you are as a person and the things that you have achieved. A lot of times we mistake what we have achieved to be a victory for our personhood, for our values, right? Now, somebody was the president of America, Richard Nixon. He was supposed to be the most secured person in America, but yet he was dealing with insecurity to the point that he was still interested in what was happening in another party, right? To the point of trying to tap the conversation that was going on there. Hitler was a leader of a country, yet he was not healed from the impact of his upbringing. Joseph Stalin claimed to be leading a revolution, but yet he was supposed to be a prominent revolutionist. But at the same time, he was dealing with the impact of his upbringing, Idi Amin Dada, and the rest of it. So the fact that somebody becomes a president, or becomes a CEO of a company, or becomes an owner of a big organization, does not mean the person is well. It doesn't mean, because you are saying you turned out well, you know the struggles you are dealing with. You know how many times you want to say yes and you said no. You know how many times you want to say no and you say yes. You know how many times you have decided you are going to have a very serious and important conversation with your boss, a colleague, a customer, a client, and you get there and you shrink. You are not able to have that conversation. So you know the issues you are dealing with. You know how driven you are at the detriment of the people you are working with. You know the challenges you are dealing with. You know the things that threaten your own parenting and your own marriage and the rest of it. But you suppress all of that to tell me you turn well. You want me to measure your turning well with the wealth that you have acquired. You want me to measure your turning well with the school that you are running. You want me to measure your turning well with the car that you are driving. If it is so, why do people at some level that we consider to be successful take their own life at one point or the other? True. Which means success, turning well, is not all about the things that we have acquired. That's why the book that I read says the life of a man does not consist in the abundance of what he possesses. What shall it profit a man if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? The test of whether you turn well or not is the state of your soul, spirit, soul, and body. How are you faring? How are you doing? Anybody can achieve anything. Anybody can come up with any innovation. Things can happen to you, that is beyond even some of the things you have ever imagined. Is a possibility. But the question is, who are you deep down? And that is one gap. This idea that we turned well, this idea that the children that they did not beat, they are making, they are not doing well. Forgetting that people like Zig Ziglar, Anthony Robbins, people like what's the name of this gentleman? People like Billy Graham, people like Brian Tracy, they raise their children in this country, America. And many other people raise their children in different developed countries. And they are able to raise children that are disciplined. And I keep telling them, the children that you say are not disciplined, they build their nations. The children you say they are not disciplined, they build plane, you are flying it. They build cars, you are driving it. They build cathedral. You copy it and go and build it in your country. You order their cars, you do everything. You that you say you were raised well, you are fighting in the parliament. You are breaking each other's heads. You are not creating anything. You are a consumption country. You consume, you produce what you do not consume, you consume what you do not produce. And so at the end of the day, where is the issue? So the point, the major gap that I deal with when it comes to Africa is this belief system that the people who gave them plane, the people who gave them this laptop, the people who gave them microphone, gave them glasses, they do not, they possess the wisdom to create all of those things that have made life easy and comfortable for them, but they do not possess the wisdom to parent. They do not possess the wisdom to raise children. Haba.
So I mean, it's like a man of God that is not honest, you know?
Yes. So, Haba, what do you mean? So you want to take their phone. You want to take their phone. Not only that you want to take their phone, you want to use their phone as a sign of relevance and that you have arrived and opulence. Because you want to put on the table your iPhone 17 Pro Max. That's how you want to be respected in Nigeria, which is slavery mentality. You want to drive a big car that when you arrive, you want to show the car so that how you want to be respected. So you are not only interested in taking what these people created, you are also using them as your braggables to show that you have arrived. If they remove all of these things from you, you all of a sudden you become naked. And so you receive all of these things that have become the guidance of your soul. But you don't want to believe that they know something that we do not know about raising children. That is major gap that I deal with on a daily basis. And I keep decolonizing the minds of the people we see.
Yeah, and we have just about 3 minutes left, and I still have one question for you. I think now it's even clearer every day why they say strategy eats culture eats strategy for breakfast, you know?
Correct.
Yeah. So on the everyday parent watching this interview, this is your last question. So if you can do it in like 2 minutes, I'll appreciate that. For the parent watching this, who is it, a policymaker or an institution, like someone like you, just someone raising children in a hard economy under real pressure, okay? What is the one shift in mindset from the burden and wisdom of parenting that you want them to walk away with from watching this?
Okay, well, the one shift in mindset is that we should quit this idea of thinking that it is only parents that raise children. Okay. Only biological parents. There are 4 rings that raise, there are 4 institutions that raise children. The first is the family. The family is first, but family is not all. The role of the family is to provide moral compass for children. Then we have the community. In the community, you have the religious organizations, you have neighbors, you have the media. The purpose of the media, the community, is to reinforce those values that parents are inculcating in their children. Then you have the state. The responsibility of the state is to provide social amenities, level playing field. That is why tax is given to the state. That is why there's commonwealth that the state manages. Those things that the state manage is not supposed to feed the people who manage it. The people who manage it are supposed to distribute these things. And that is why if you are in a developing country, you must be interested in how your nation is run. You cannot be interested only in, I'm looking for school fees. I want to take responsibility for my children's health. In the developed climate, you don't need to have the resources, at least to send your children to the first 9 years of education, right? Education becomes expensive at the level of higher institution. So my word to parents who are going through pressure in Africa is that be interested in the state of the nation. Be interested in the conversation that is going to transform our nation. Don't think that whatever they are discussing politically, socially, does not concern me. I just want to raise my children. There's no nation on earth where the responsibility of raising children is solely on the shoulder of the biological parents alone, and the children do well. Because what God has deposited in children, no one family is big enough to bring all of that out. That is why there are support systems here and there. So my charge is, do all your best, do all you can, be out there, but keep in mind that it is malfunctioning for you to be doing what the state is supposed to do for your children. Today, our children are not citizens of our country. They are citizens of our homes. And you see, let me conclude this way. There are two sets of children in a developing country, particularly in Nigeria. There are children who are citizens of their parents, right? Because their parents are the one who provide education, health, shelter, security, and all of that because they have the means, right? And there are children who don't have all of these things, and their parents are poor and they're not able to provide all of these things. I hope you know that in Nigeria, millions of Nigerians are living in abject poverty. Millions, 133 million, right? Are living in abject poverty out of 240 million people, according to the United Nations. And so when you understand that, those children who come from those homes, they are stateless children, 67 million of them, stateless children. And so we must also learn the word. Don't let us feel that our children are okay. Let me tell you something. An African proverb says, your chicken is not safe when your neighbor goes to bed hungry. So when we think we are raising our own children, we are good. What about the children that who are stateless? It is important that we pay attention to all of that.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Taiwo Akinlami. I'm going to leave his email and his contact for his academy if you're interested in reaching out to him in the chat box, and so that you can reach out to him and learn more. You can see he's a reservoir of knowledge, and like I said, he's a mentor's mentor. We're all learning every day. You know, the takeaway point for me today is that you can't raise your kids the way you were brought up. You know, we are all evolving. You know, that's why you see most last borns in most homes, they enjoy some life. There's some luxury in raising them. You know, we don't have the energy as much as before to run around. Even in the African context of strict parenting, you can have a child at 50, you can't be running around and whipping the way you whipped the one when you were 30. You know, so and time also is a factor. There are things you can do at some age. There's some things you don't do at some age. However, if you are behind schedule, you can always catch up. You understand? If you are not living in denial as a child. And it's also important to read. You know, those are my takeaway from all that you said. And do not be ignorant of what is happening in your society. Key point, you must vote. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Correct.
You must vote. You know, if you bad leadership raise bad children. Bad leadership creates quality, poor education. Poor education raises bad children. So, Mr. Akinlami, you have really pricked not
Thank
just
you
my
so much.
conscience, but a lot of people's conscience.
It's
So,
my pleasure to be with you today.
fantastic. Thank you. You
Thank you
always be back. You
for
have my
having
word
me
on
again.
that. Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. See you next week. Bye. Bye.